Hey people, get ready to crush everyday TOEFL iBT tests for all modules and make your dreams come true. I'm your motivator and I'll be guiding you through the test prep videos. So don't forget to like, share, and subscribe or you'll be missing out on some serious preparation.
Conversation 1. You will hear a conversation. A female student visits the university financial aid office to speak with a counselor about a reduction in her scholarship award for the upcoming semester. First, you have some time to look at the 5 questions. Now listen carefully and answer the questions. Excuse me, I was told to come here to talk about my financial aid package for next semester.
Of course. I'm Mr. Davidson, one of the financial aid counselors. How can I help you today?
Well, my name is Maria Chen. I received a letter saying my scholarship amount was being reduced, but I don't really understand why. My grades are still good, I haven't dropped below a 3.5.
Let me pull up your file here. Okay, I see. Your scholarship was adjusted based on a recalculation of your expected family contribution, or EFC. Did your family's income change at all last year?
Actually, yes. My father got a promotion, so technically our household income went up. But we still have a lot of expenses. My younger sister just started college this fall too, so there are 2 of us enrolled at the same time.
I see. That's actually something we can address directly. There's a process called a professional judgment appeal, where you can provide documentation of special circumstances, like having multiple family members enrolled in college simultaneously. The Financial Aid Committee can review your situation and potentially adjust your package.
Oh, I didn't know that was an option. So I could potentially get my original scholarship amount back?
Not necessarily the exact same amount, but the committee could revise your aid after reviewing your case. You'd need to submit a formal appeal form along with supporting documents, things like your sister's current enrollment verification and your family's most recent federal tax return.
How long does that process usually take?
Typically 3 to 4 weeks once we have all the required documents in hand. The deadline to have aid finalized for next semester is August 15th, so you still have a little over a month to work with.
That's cutting it close, but I think I can get everything together in time. Is there anything else I should know about?
One thing worth mentioning, if you're facing immediate financial difficulty while you wait for the appeal decision, you can also apply for an emergency grant. It's a smaller amount, usually up to $500, but it can help bridge the gap in the short term.
I hadn't even considered that. That's really helpful to know. I'll definitely look into it.
I'd also recommend scheduling a full appointment with one of our senior counselors to go over your entire financial package. Sometimes there are work-study positions or departmental grants that students aren't aware of and that could supplement your aid.
Great. I feel a lot better now than when I walked in. Thank you so much, Mr. Davidson.
Of course. Good luck with the appeal, and don't hesitate to come back or give us a call if you have any more questions along the way.
That is the end of the conversation 1. You now have some time to answer the questions. Conversation 2. You will hear a conversation. A male student visits the university housing office to speak with a coordinator about transferring to a different dormitory room for the fall semester due to ongoing conflicts with his current roommate. First, you have some time to look at the 5 questions. Now listen carefully and answer the questions.
Hi, I was hoping to speak with someone about changing my room assignment for next semester.
Of course. I'm Ms. Rivera, the housing coordinator. Come on in and have a seat. What's the situation?
My name is James Park. I'm currently in Dawson Hall, room 214, and I've been having some ongoing issues with my roommate. It's really been affecting my ability to study and sleep.
I'm sorry to hear that, James. Can you tell me a bit more about the nature of those issues? We want to find the right solution for your situation.
It's mostly about noise and schedule conflicts. My roommate keeps very different hours. He's regularly up until 2 or 3 in the morning with friends visiting the room. I have early morning classes and labs, and I've tried talking to him directly about it multiple times, but nothing has changed.
Have you spoken with your resident advisor about this?
Yes, twice actually. The RA tried to mediate between us, but honestly, the situation hasn't improved at all.
Okay. Since you've already gone through the RA mediation process, that actually strengthens your case for a room reassignment. Normally we require documentation that an informal resolution was at least attempted before we can move forward with a formal request.
Oh, good. So what's the next step? Is there a form I need to fill out?
Yes. You'll need to complete a room change request form. You can find it on the Housing Services portal under your account. You'll also need to attach a brief written statement describing the situation and get a short written confirmation from your RA verifying that mediation was attempted.
That sounds manageable. Are there any rooms available in quieter parts of campus? I heard that the dorms near the library have stricter quiet hours.
You're thinking of Whitmore Hall. It does have enforced quiet hours beginning at 10 p.m., including on weekends, which is stricter than standard residence halls. However, I should be upfront with you, spaces in Whitmore Hall are limited, and we process all requests on a first-come, first-served basis.
I see. So the sooner I get my paperwork in, the better my chances.
Exactly. And one more important detail, room reassignment requests for the fall semester can only be officially processed starting August 1st, so you'd want to have all your documentation submitted right around that date.
Wait, August 1st? That's only about 2.5 weeks from now. I need to pull those documents together quickly.
Yes, but the good news is that your RA can typically provide the written confirmation within a day or 2. The personal statement is something you can write yourself, and the online form is straightforward. You can realistically have everything ready well before then.
All right. And if Whitmore Hall ends up being full, is there any chance I could just be moved to a different room or a different roommate within Dawson Hall?
Absolutely. If your first choice building isn't available, we'll work with you to identify the best alternative. Some students also end up on a wait list for their preferred location and get placed there mid-semester when a space opens up.
Okay. That's reassuring to know. I'll start on the form as soon as I get back. Thanks, Ms. Rivera.
You're welcome. Feel free to call or email the housing office directly if any questions come up during the process. We're here to help. That is the end of the conversation too. You now have some time to answer the questions. Lecture 1. You will hear part of a lecture about geology. Volcanic island formation. First, you have some time to look at the 6 questions. Now listen carefully and answer the questions.
Alright, let's pick up where we left off. Last time we talked about tectonic plates in general, and today I want to focus on a very specific and fascinating consequence of plate tectonics, the formation of volcanic islands. Now, when most people think of islands, they picture sandy beaches and palm trees, but geologically speaking, many of the world's islands exist because of intense volcanic activity deep beneath the ocean floor. So, the process begins with what we call a hotspot. A hotspot is a region in the mantle where an unusually hot plume of magma rises toward the surface. Unlike volcanoes that form along plate boundaries, hotspot volcanoes can form right in the middle of a tectonic plate. The Hawaiian Islands are the textbook example of this. The mantle plume stays relatively fixed while the Pacific plate moves over it, and this is critical, so you get a chain of islands, each progressively older as you move away from the hotspot. The actual birth of a volcanic island follows several stages. First, magma erupts onto the ocean floor, building up what we call a seamount, essentially an underwater volcanic mountain. Over thousands to millions of years, repeated eruptions pile up enough material that the seamount breaches the ocean surface. At that point, you have a new island. But the story doesn't end there. Once the plate carries the island away from the hotspot, volcanic activity ceases, and the island begins to erode and subside. It slowly sinks back beneath the ocean and becomes a seamount again, completing a full geological cycle.
Student, Professor Marsh, I was reading that the Big Island of Hawaii is actually still growing. Does that mean the hotspot is directly beneath it right now?
Exactly right. The Big Island, Hawaii Island, sits directly over the hotspot at this moment, which is why Kilauea and Mauna Loa are among the most active volcanoes on Earth. And interestingly, there is already a new seamount called Loihi forming about 35 kilometers to the southeast of the Big Island. It's still roughly a kilometer beneath the ocean's surface, but given geological timescales, it will eventually become the next Hawaiian island, though not for another 100,000 years or so. This illustrates perfectly how the process is ongoing and continuous. Now, I also want to distinguish hotspot islands from another type, volcanic arc islands. These form at subduction zones, where one tectonic plate dives beneath another. The descending plate releases water into the mantle, which lowers the melting point of the rock and generates magma. That magma rises and creates a curved chain of volcanoes parallel to the subduction zone, what we call a volcanic arc. The Japanese archipelago and the Aleutian Islands in Alaska are prime examples. The key difference from hotspot islands is that volcanic arc islands tend to form simultaneously along the arc, rather than in a sequential age-progressive chain.
That is the end of the lecture 1. You now have some time to answer the questions. Lecture 2. You will hear part of a lecture about chemistry. Polymer synthesis. First, you have some time to look at the 6 questions. Now listen carefully and answer the questions.
Good morning, everyone. Today we are going to dive into polymer synthesis, essentially, the chemistry of how we build large molecules from small repeating units. Polymers are everywhere in modern life: the plastic in your water bottle, the nylon in your jacket, the rubber in your tires. All of these materials owe their existence to well-designed chemical reactions that link small molecules called monomers into long, chain-like structures called polymers. Understanding how we control that linking process is the heart of polymer chemistry. There are 2 fundamental classes of polymerization reactions, and I want you to be very clear on the distinction. The first is addition polymerization, also called chain growth polymerization. In this process, monomers add one by one onto a growing chain. There is no byproduct released, every atom in the monomer ends up in the polymer. A classic example is the polymerization of ethylene to form polyethylene. Ethylene has a carbon-carbon double bond, and under the right initiating conditions, either free radicals, cations, or anions, that double bond opens up and links to the next monomer. The reaction can propagate extremely rapidly once initiated. The second class is condensation polymerization, also called step growth polymerization. Here, monomers react with each other through functional groups, like hydroxyl groups and carboxyl groups, and each time 2 monomers join, a small molecule is released as a byproduct, most commonly water, but sometimes methanol or hydrogen chloride. Nylon and polyester are the canonical examples. Nylon 6 forms when a diamine reacts with a diacid, releasing water at each linkage. The resulting bond is called an amide bond, or a peptide bond if you're thinking about proteins, and that's not a coincidence, because proteins are essentially biological polyamides.
Student, Professor Okafor, does the byproduct water in condensation polymerization cause any practical problems in industrial manufacturing?
That's a great practical question. Yes, absolutely. Because water is released during the reaction, its accumulation can actually drive the equilibrium backward, Le Chatelier's principle at work, and prevent the polymer from reaching high molecular weight. In industrial settings, manufacturers go to considerable lengths to remove water as it forms, often using vacuum systems or desiccants. For polyester synthesis in particular, the water must be continuously driven off to push the reaction toward the high molecular weight product. So yes, managing that byproduct is a genuine engineering challenge, not just a theoretical footnote. Now, beyond these 2 fundamental mechanisms, I want to briefly introduce living polymerization, a more advanced technique developed in the 1950s by Michael Svark. In living polymerization, the termination and chain transfer steps that normally interrupt chain growth are suppressed. This means the polymer chains keep growing as long as monomer is available, and you can add different monomers in sequence to build what we call block copolymers, polymers with distinct segments of different chemical character. This level of architectural control is critical for designing materials like thermoplastic elastomers, where you want one block to be rigid and another to be flexible. The precision achievable with living polymerization techniques has genuinely revolutionized materials science.
That is the end of the lecture 2. You now have some time to answer the questions. Lecture 3. You will hear part of a lecture about sociology. Social conformity studies. First, you have some time to look at the 6 questions. Now listen carefully and answer the questions.
Let's talk today about one of the most influential and, frankly, unsettling areas in social psychology, the study of conformity. Conformity, broadly defined, is the tendency of individuals to align their attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors with those of the people around them. Now, on the surface this might sound like a fairly mundane observation. Of course people are influenced by others. But what the classic experimental studies of the mid-20th century revealed is just how powerful, pervasive, and sometimes irrational that influence can be. The foundational work here belongs to Solomon Asch, who conducted his famous line judgment experiments in the early 1950s. In these studies, a naive participant was placed in a room with several Confederates, people who appeared to be fellow participants but were actually working with the researcher. The group was shown cards with lines of clearly different lengths and asked which comparison line matched a standard line. The answer was always visually obvious. But on certain critical trials, the Confederates unanimously gave the wrong answer. What Asch found was striking. Approximately 75% of participants conformed to the incorrect majority answer at least once, and about a third of all critical trial responses were conforming errors. When interviewed afterward, participants gave various reasons. Some genuinely doubted their own perception, others knew the group was wrong but didn't want to appear different. Asch's work established a critical distinction that sociologists still use today: the difference between informational social influence and normative social influence. Informational influence occurs when we conform because we genuinely believe others have superior knowledge or a better vantage point. Normative influence occurs when we conform not because we think the group is right, but because we want to be accepted and avoid the discomfort of standing out. In Asch's experiment, both were operating, but the post-experiment interviews suggested normative influence was the dominant driver for most participants.
Student, Professor Webb, didn't Asch also test what happened when the participant had at least one ally, someone who gave the correct answer?
Absolutely, and that variation is one of the most important findings from the entire research program. When Asch introduced just one dissenting Confederate, someone who broke with the majority and gave the correct answer, conformity rates dropped dramatically, by roughly 75%. The participant no longer felt alone in their perception, and that social support was enough to embolden them to trust their own judgment. This tells us something profound: conformity is not simply about numbers. It's about unanimity. A single ally can shatter the pressure of an otherwise unanimous majority. This has obvious implications for understanding group dynamics in organizations, juries, and even political movements. Now, Asch's work was followed by Stanley Milgram, who took conformity research in a darker direction. His obedience studies in the 1960s examined compliance with authority rather than peer pressure specifically. But they share the same underlying question: under what social conditions do people override their own moral compass? What both lines of research demonstrate is that situational factors, the structure and composition of the social environment, are extraordinarily powerful predictors of behavior, often more powerful than individual personality or moral character. This challenges what psychologists call the fundamental attribution error, our tendency to overestimate the role of individual character and underestimate the role of situation in explaining why people behave as they do.
That is the end of the lecture 3. You now have some time to answer the questions. That is the end of the TOEFL iBT listening test. You now have some time to review your answers.
Hey people, how was your test? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, or you'll be missing out on some serious fun. See you tomorrow!